The plane touched down on the British Virgin Islands just before noon, the tropical heat washing over me as soon as I stepped off the jet bridge. The year had been relentless. Movie premieres, red carpets, interviews, and I'd barely had a moment to breathe. A solo vacation felt like the only way to clear my head, so I'd booked this trip on a whim, craving peace and, honestly, a break from everything. The hotel lobby was open air, with the steady hum of ceiling fans and the sweet scent of coconut and salt water in the air. I was checking in, trying to ignore the curious glances from the other guests, when I heard a voice I recognized. I looked up, started, and froze. Standing there, leaning casually against the counter, was Paul Taylor. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since those Britain Drops Talent days, when we were both just teenagers, making a name for ourselves. The shared fame, the stupid rumours, the brief but intense fling we'd had. All of it rushed back to me in an instant. "Paul?" I said, keeping my tone polite but guarded. My heart rate kicked up a notch, but I masked it with a smile. "It's been a while." "Yeah, a lifetime, huh?" Paul chuckled, his familiar easy smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He looked just the same. Lean, effortlessly handsome. "How's Hollywood treating you?" I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "It's a lot, but good. You know how it is." He nodded, eyes scanning the lobby before returning to mine. "I know exactly how it is." There was a pause. An odd silence that felt like there were more unspoken words between us than there had ever been before. I couldn't help but think about the rumours that had followed Paul for years. The Paul is dead conspiracy. The bizarre theories that he wasn't the real Paul Taylor, that his identity had been swapped out after some accident. People said everything about him had changed after a certain point, that he wasn't the same person. But that had to be nonsense, right? A product of people looking for a story. But even as I brushed off the thought, I couldn't help but wonder. There was always something a little off about Paul, something in the way he carried himself, the things he didn't say. The rumours had made him seem like some kind of ghost, a mystery wrapped in a beautiful enigma. "Are you here alone?" I asked, trying to push past the uncomfortable weight in the air. "Yeah," Paul replied with a small smile. "Needed to get away for a bit, clear my head." I nodded, wanting to say something more, something that could bridge the gap between the past and now, but I couldn't find the words. Paul continued, his voice softening a little. "I'm staying here for a while. Maybe we could grab a drink later. I'm sure we've both got plenty of catching up to do." It wasn't a bad idea, but still I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about him, something subtle, but unmistakable. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Let's do it." The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when I met Paul by the beach, the soft hum of the ocean waves mingling with the distant chatter of other guests. The hotel's private section of the beach was nearly empty, save for a few couples and families scattered around enjoying the evening. It was quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. Paul was already there, seated at a small table near the edge of the water, a half-full glass of something amber-coloured in his hand. He looked relaxed, almost like he'd never left this island, like nothing had changed at all. "Hey," I said as I approached, a little unsure of myself. "Hey, Ethan," Paul said with that same easy smile, his eyes glinting in the fading light. He stood up to greet me, and I noticed how much taller he seemed than I remembered. Or maybe it was just the way the shadows made everything feel a bit more intense. We sat down, the low wooden table between us, the sound of the surf adding a rhythmic backdrop to our quiet conversation. The air was warm, a slight breeze ruffling my shirt, and the view was nothing short of breathtaking. We talked at first about the mundane, how the island looked now versus the last time either of us had been here, the changes in the music industry, and the overwhelming pressure of being in the public eye. It was all surface level, nothing too deep, but the conversation felt easy, almost effortless, and then slowly the flirtation began to surface. Paul's hand brushed against mine as he reached for his glass, his fingers lingering just a little too long. He didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. "You're still the same, you know," Paul said, his voice light, but his gaze was sharper than usual. "Same how?" I asked, trying to keep things casual, but I could feel the pull between us, like a magnet drawing us closer. "Still a bit guarded," Paul replied with a slight grin, "still running from whatever it is you're really thinking." I couldn't help but laugh. "You always did have a way of reading me." He raised an eyebrow, his grin widening. "Not so hard when you wear your thoughts on your face, Ethan." I shifted in my seat, the tension between us thickening in a way I wasn't prepared for. I'd always thought Paul was charming, magnetic even, but this was different. There was a charge now, something unspoken crackling in the air. "Maybe I'm just out of practice," I said, trying to deflect. "Been a while since I had the chance to relax." "Yeah, I get that," Paul said softly, his tone turning more serious, more intimate. "It's hard to find peace when the whole world's watching." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Fame had a way of isolating you, making you feel like you were always performing, always under a microscope. It was a lonely existence, even if you had people around you. "I've missed this," Paul added after a pause, his gaze shifting toward the horizon. Not just the attention, but the simplicity, the quiet period. I watched him for a moment, the way the setting sun cast a soft glow across his face, the way his lips barely parted as he spoke. There was a vulnerability in his words, something raw beneath the surface. I felt myself leaning in, just a little, as if drawn by some invisible force. It was impossible to ignore the chemistry between us, the way he looked at me, the way we had always been able to slip into something familiar like no time had passed at all. The conversation drifted after that, our words becoming less meaningful as we both settled into the silence between us. But I could feel it building, the tension tightening like a slow-burning fuse. Finally, Paul stood up and held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. "I've got a villa just up the beach. Let's get away from all this for a bit." I hesitated. There was something dangerous about the offer, something reckless, but I didn't pull away. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little breathier than I meant it to be. "Let's go." As we walked in silence toward the villa, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. This moment, this feeling, it was like we had slipped back in time. But even with the easy chemistry and the old familiarity, there was something different now. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Paul motioned toward the sitting area. "Make yourself at home," he said, his voice warm but laced with something else I couldn't quite place. He moved to the bar, pouring us both a drink, something dark and strong. I took a seat on one of the plush couches, watching him as he went about his task. It was strange being here with him, just the two of us, the kind of strangeness that made my stomach tighten in anticipation, but also in uncertainty. "Thanks for inviting me," I said, trying to fill the space between us with casual words. Paul turned to face me, his eyes steady. "No need to thank me. I'm glad you came." He paused before continuing, his voice softer now. "I've been wanting to talk to you, for a while now." I raised an eyebrow, not sure where this was going. "About what?" He sat down across from me, placing our drinks on the coffee table, and leaned forward slightly. "Oh, you know, about whatever comes to mind." I felt my pulse quicken, that familiar knot in my stomach twisted again, but I couldn't tell if it was from excitement or dread. "What comes to your mind?" I asked, keeping my voice even despite the rising tension. Paul nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "We were something once, and I never got to explain what happened. Not really." I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how much time had passed since we'd shared anything close to an honest conversation. Not just between us, but with anyone. Fame had a way of distorting everything. We'd been young, but there had been real feelings there, and I'd never gotten closure. Didn't seem like there was much to explain, I replied, trying to keep the conversation light, but my voice betrayed me. Things ended when they ended. Paul smiled, but it was faint, tinged with something that wasn't quite regret. Yeah, I guess. But there's more to it than that. There always was. I took a deep breath, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass as I tried to steady myself. There was a heaviness in the air now, a weight to his words that I hadn't anticipated. I guess I've always wondered, I said, leaning forward slightly, how much of everything was real. You know, the crazy stories, the people who believe I'm a reptilian, and that you were replaced by a body double. I trailed off, unsure of how to finish the thought. There was a strange undercurrent to everything with Paul, something that felt off. Even now, sitting in front of him, I wasn't entirely sure I could trust what was happening between us. Paul's eyes flickered, but he didn't look surprised. There was too much strange about him, too many little inconsistencies that never quite added up. I hadn't thought about the conspiracy in a long time, but being here with him, seeing how different he felt, how other he seemed, I couldn't help but wonder. Paul let out a small laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. I can't blame people for thinking that. It's just easier for them to create a story than to accept what really happened. What really happens. He paused, his expression turning more serious, almost pained. But honestly, Ethan, the rumours don't bother me as much as the loneliness does, the isolation. I looked at him, sensing the rawness in his words, the vulnerability he was letting slip. It was a side of Paul I hadn't seen in years, and it unsettled me. He was always the confident one, the one who had it all together, but now he seemed almost fragile. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't find the words. There was too much history between us, too much unsaid, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. Instead, I just nodded, setting my glass down on the table. I get it. It's not easy, is it? This was all supposed to be a dream come true, but sometimes it feels like a nightmare. Paul's gaze softened, and for a moment he didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy with meaning. Then, almost as if the words had been building inside him for too long, he spoke again. You were always the one who understood. You were the only one who ever really got it, Ethan. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. I've never stopped thinking about you. The words hit me like a wave, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. My heart raced as I processed what he was saying. The chemistry between us had always been undeniable, but hearing him say it aloud, hearing him say that he hadn't stopped thinking about me, felt like a punch to the gut. Before I could respond, Paul closed the distance between us, leaning in slowly, as if testing the waters. His breath was warm on my skin, and I could feel the heat rising between us. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped him, but instead I found myself leaning in too, unable to resist the pull, the familiarity of him, the unspoken connection that had never really faded. When our lips met, it was like coming home, like all the years of silence and distance disappeared in an instant. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, but then, as the moment stretched on, the tension between us broke, and everything that had been left unsaid rushed to the surface. We pulled back, breathless, but I could feel the unspoken questions between us, questions that we both knew we weren't ready to answer just yet. Let's just not think about it, Paul murmured, his lips brushing against mine. And for once, I agreed. We didn't have to think about it, not yet. The morning sun crept into the villa through the large glass doors, casting warm golden rays across the room. The soft sounds of the ocean continued to roll in from outside, the rhythmic crashing of waves blending with the stillness of the early hours. I woke slowly, the soreness of the night still clinging to me, and the deep satisfaction Paul gave to me clung to my smile. There was an undeniable sense of peace in the air, like the world had paused for a brief moment just for us. I found Paul already awake, already wearing clothes, seated at the breakfast table with a spread of tropical fruits, papaya, mango, and passion fruit. He looked effortlessly at ease, the way he always had, his messy hair falling over his forehead and his shirt hanging loose over his frame. There was something about him that was still so familiar, even with all the years and distance between us. "Morning," I said, my voice still rough from sleep. "Good morning," Paul replied, his smile genuine, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. It wasn't the usual glint of humour or confidence. It was deeper, quieter, almost like he was waiting for something. I sat down across from him, the tropical fruits laid out in bright, inviting colours. For a moment, I felt like I should just focus on the simple comfort of the breakfast, distract myself from the whirlwind of thoughts that had been running through my mind since the night before. But that wasn't enough anymore. We ate in silence for a while, the peacefulness of the moment doing little to calm the storm in my chest. I kept stealing glances at Paul, trying to figure out what exactly had changed between us. Last night had felt so charged, so filled with unspoken words and questions, I couldn't push it out of my mind no matter how hard I tried. Finally, Paul broke the silence, his voice calm, but his eyes never leaving mine. "You're distracted," he said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze cutting through the quiet like a knife. "I can feel it. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, unsure whether I should tell him what had been gnawing at me. It wasn't just the kiss or the night we'd shared. It was something more, something I hadn't fully grasped until now. I looked at him, taking a slow breath. I really don't want to say, because then nothing will ever be the same. Paul's expression softened slightly, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. "What do you mean?" I took another deep breath, steeling myself. "It's about last night, and about you." His eyebrows raised in mild curiosity, but he didn't pull away. "Me? What about me?" I studied him for a moment, trying to piece together the fragments of everything that didn't quite fit. "It's the scar," I said slowly. "I saw it when we were together all those years ago. In an emergency surgery when he was 14, Paul Taylor had his appendix removed. The surgery left a diagonal scar, a scar you don't have." Paul's eyes darkened for just a split second before he masked it with a casual smile, but I could feel his breath catch. "You noticed that, huh?" he said. He looked away, out toward the ocean, his fingers tapping lightly on his glass. There was a tension in his posture now that hadn't been there earlier, like he was bracing himself for something. "Yeah," I admitted, my heart pounding in my chest. I paused, watching him, waiting for some kind of explanation. But Paul didn't offer one. Instead, he just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're trying to say," he said quietly, his voice careful. "What's the big deal with a scar?" I felt the weight of his words, the challenge in them, but the nagging feeling in my gut only grew stronger. "The thing is," I continued, "it's not just the scar, it's everything. You don't seem the same. Your mannerisms, the way you respond to things. It's almost like there's something different about you, like someone else is wearing your skin." There, I had said it. Paul's face went still, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to respond, but then he let out a long, slow breath. Then after a long silence, he finally spoke. I wasn't going to say anything, maybe because I'm polite. I chuckled sarcastically at him. "Anyway," he continued, "we all have our secrets, don't we?" I shook my head incredulously and said, "Sure we do, but not all of us are imposters who—" He interrupted. "Ethan Hart was circumcised as a newborn, yet you somehow now have all your original parts." Of course I froze. That seems to be the first reaction to everything. Then slowly I lifted the teapot and poured each a serving. I put 2 lumps of sugar into his cup. "You always liked it sweet," I said. He placed 2 in mine, "and so did you."